I stood there in my wedding dress, the veil still clinging to my curls, as whispers slithered through the room like smoke. She's not on the list. Isn't she just a guest? Wait, was this a setup? The murmur reached a fever pitch as Brandon's mother, Judith, raised her voice near the reception entrance. I'm sorry, but her name isn't here. Vanessa Moore, you're not even listed as the bride. Gasps rippled through the crowd. My heart pounded so loudly I couldn't hear the string quartet anymore. And then, just as the officiant was about to continue with a visibly confused expression, an old man stood up. It was Arthur, my late father's closest friend. He raised a trembling hand and in the other held a folder. Actually, before this farce continues, I believe the truth needs to be known. The room fell silent. He walked toward the altar, placed the document in the officiant's hands, and said, "This marriage is already illegal, because Brandon Hayes is still legally married to another woman, and Vanessa was never supposed to be humiliated like this." The silence exploded into chaos. My name is Vanessa Moore. I was born and raised in Modesto, California, to a single father who gave up everything to see me succeed. My mother passed when I was 4, and from then on, it was always just Dad and me. He owned a small auto repair shop downtown, the kind where locals brought their cars not just because he was good with engines, but because he remembered their kids' names and always had a pot of coffee brewing. "Nessie," he'd say, his hands permanently stained with motor oil no matter how much he scrubbed them. "There are 2 things in life worth having: your integrity and your ability to work hard. Everything else is just luck and circumstance." Dad worked until his hands bled, putting away every spare dollar so I could go to college. When I got accepted to UC Berkeley with a partial scholarship, he cried harder than I did. "Your mother would be so proud," he whispered as we hugged in our tiny kitchen. So damn proud. College was a different world. While most of my peers came from money and connections, I worked part-time at the campus bookstore to cover expenses. I studied business and marketing, determined to make something of myself. I wasn't going to waste my father's sacrifice. By 25, I'd worked my way up from marketing assistant to account manager at a boutique agency in San Francisco. I lived in a shoebox apartment with a roommate, sent money home to Dad when I could, and was building something resembling a life. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. Then came the Northern California Wine Industry Conference in San Francisco, where my agency had sent me to network with potential clients. That's where I met Brandon Hayes. I was staffing our booth, arranging brochures about our marketing services, when a tall man with copper brown hair and a smile that seemed practiced yet genuine approached. He wore a tailored navy suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. "Whoever designed these brochures deserves a raise," he said, picking one up. "Clean, elegant, communicates luxury without trying too hard." I smiled. That would be me, actually. He extended his hand. "Brandon Hayes, Hayes Valley Vineyards." I knew the name. Hayes Valley was one of the most prestigious wineries in Napa, family-owned for generations, featured in every upscale food and wine magazine. Vanessa Moore, JCM Marketing. My handshake was firm. Dad had taught me that. "Vanessa," he repeated, as if testing how my name felt in his mouth. "Would you have dinner with me tonight? I think our vineyard could use someone with your eye for detail." That dinner lasted 3 hours. Brandon spoke passionately about his family's legacy, about the vineyard's commitment to sustainable practices, about how he wanted to modernize their brand while honoring tradition. He asked about my background, and I told him about Modesto, about Dad, about working my way through college. "You're real," he said, looking at me with those hazel eyes that seemed to absorb everything. "Do you know how rare that is in my world? Everyone's performing, positioning, networking. You're just authentic." I blushed, unused to such focused attention. "I don't know how to be anything else." "Don't ever change that," he said, reaching across the table to touch my hand. "It's refreshing." Our relationship developed quickly. Weekend trips to Napa became regular. Brandon introduced me to wine beyond my price range, to restaurants where reservations were made months in advance, to a social circle that vacationed in places I'd only seen in magazines. For my part, I took him to hole-in-the-wall taquerias, to midnight movies at the Castro Theater, to my favorite bookstore, where the owner knew me by name. "You ground me," Brandon would say, his arm around my waist as we walked through San Francisco's foggy streets. "You remind me what's real." 6 months in, he brought me home to meet his family. The Hayes estate in Napa Valley sat on acres of perfectly manicured vineyards, with a main house that looked like something out of a period drama. Stone. Pathways wound through gardens. A swimming pool gleamed in the distance, and the air smelled of lavender and money. Judith Hayes, Brandon's mother, greeted me with a cool smile that didn't reach her eyes. She was elegant in that timeless way, perfectly highlighted blonde hair, tailored cream dress, pearls that had probably been passed down for generations. "Vanessa," she said, air-kissing both my cheeks. "Brandon has told us so much about you. What a surprising match." That evening was the first indication that I might not fit into Brandon's world as seamlessly as I'd hoped. Dinner conversation revolved around people I didn't know, events I hadn't attended, and subtle references to family wealth I couldn't relate to. "And where did you go to school, dear?" Judith asked, sipping her wine. "Their own label, of course." "UC Berkeley," I answered proudly. "On scholarship, right?" "How resourceful." The slight pause before resourceful hung in the air like a silent judgment. Brandon squeezed my hand under the table. Later, when we were alone in the guest room, separate from his at Judith's insistence, he apologized. "Mom's just protective. Old money, old ways. She'll warm up when she gets to know you." I nodded, but something had shifted. For the first time, I felt the weight of the differences between us, not just financial, but cultural. I came from a world where people fixed their own leaky faucets and knew the price of milk. Brandon came from a world where problems were handled by staff and inconveniences were delegated away. Still, love has a way of making you believe that differences don't matter. When Brandon proposed a year later on a private yacht in the San Francisco Bay, I said yes without hesitation. Dad had passed away just months before from a sudden heart attack, and in my grief, Brandon's love felt like a lifeline. What I didn't know then was that saying yes to Brandon meant saying yes to a version of myself I wasn't sure I recognized, and to a family that had already decided I didn't belong. The engagement period should have been the happiest time of my life. Instead, it became a gradual erosion of my identity, so subtle I barely noticed until I was already halfway gone. It started with the ring. Brandon presented me with a family heirloom, a 4-carat diamond in an antique platinum setting. It was beautiful, undoubtedly valuable, but so large it caught on everything. When I gently suggested having it resized or reset into something more practical, Judith intervened. "That ring has been worn by Hayes women for generations," she said during one of our wedding planning lunches at her country club. "Altering it would be disrespectful to our heritage, so I wore it as it was, this heavy symbol of belonging that never quite fit." Then came the wedding planning. What I had envisioned as an intimate ceremony at a boutique hotel in San Francisco quickly morphed into an elaborate 300-person affair at the Hayes estate. Judith took control with frightening efficiency. "The Hayes name carries certain expectations," she explained when I expressed concern about the growing guest list. "These aren't just guests, Vanessa. They're connections, relationships that have sustained our family business for generations." Brandon sided with his mother. "It's just one day, Ness. Let's make everyone happy." Everyone except me, I thought but didn't say. My dress was selected from a designer Judith approved. The flowers I loved, wildflowers that reminded me of hiking with my dad, were deemed too rustic and replaced with formal arrangements of white roses and orchids. The band I wanted was passed over for a string quartet that Judith insisted was more appropriate. Even my bridal shower was taken out of my best friend Jamie's hands and hosted by Judith at her club. I sat through an afternoon of being introduced as Brandon's fiancée to women who smiled politely while assessing every aspect of me, from my off-the-rack dress to my middle-class manners. "You're handling this with such grace," Jamie whispered during a moment alone. I would have lost my mind by now. I forced a smile. "It's important to Brandon. And it's just temporary, right? Once we're married, things will settle." But as the wedding approached, I found myself increasingly isolated. Brandon was busy with the vineyard, often traveling for business. My friends, uncomfortable with the Hayes formality, gradually stopped coming to events. Even Arthur Coleman, my father's best friend and a retired estate attorney who had promised to walk me down the aisle, seemed concerned. "Your father wanted you to be happy, Vanessa," he said during one of our monthly lunches. "Are you happy?" I hesitated a beat too long. "Of course, Brandon's wonderful. His family is just traditional." Arthur studied me with the same expression my father used when he thought I was being too forgiving. "Traditional doesn't mean controlling. Robert would want you to stay true to yourself." "I am," I insisted. but the words felt hollow. 3 weeks before the wedding, I discovered I had been excluded from the final menu tasting. When I confronted Brandon, his response chilled me. Mom thought it would be easier without you there. You've been so stressed lately, and you don't really understand wine pairings anyway. Something inside me snapped. I don't understand? Brandon, I've been working with luxury brands for years. I know what pairs with what. This isn't about wine. It's about your mother systematically pushing me out of my own wedding. He ran his hands through his hair, exasperated. You're overreacting. Mom is just trying to help. She knows you didn't grow up with this kind of thing. This kind of thing? You mean my own wedding? That's not what I meant, and you know it. He softened, taking my hands. Look, I know it's been tough, but we're almost there. Once we're married, things will be different. I promise. I wanted to believe him, so I swallowed my hurt, pushed down my growing unease, and focused on the future he painted for us, one where we'd build our own life, make our own decisions, free from Judith's influence. The rehearsal dinner was the final warning I should have heeded. Held at the Vineyard's private dining room, it was attended by 50 of our closest friends and family, though at least 30 were Brandon's business associates I'd never met. Judith gave a speech that night, champagne flute raised high. Hayes Valley Vineyards has been in our family for 4 generations. Brandon represents everything we've built: integrity, tradition, excellence. Tonight we celebrate not just a wedding, but a legacy continuing. She didn't mention me once. Not my name, not my role in Brandon's life, not the future we were building together. I was invisible in her narrative. As applause filled the room, Brandon squeezed my hand, oblivious to the slight. Mom's just emotional. You know how she is about family history. Later that night, in the bridal suite where I was staying alone, another tradition Judith insisted on, I called Arthur in tears. I don't think she wants me in this family, Arthur. It's like she's planning a coronation, not a wedding. And Brandon doesn't see it. Arthur was quiet for a long moment. Vanessa, I need to ask you something, and I want you to really think before answering. Do you trust Brandon completely? The question caught me off guard. Of course I do. Why? Has he been transparent with you about finances, about his past, about his expectations for your future together? I hesitated. We haven't had time to discuss everything in detail. He's been busy with the vineyard expansion. Another long pause. I see. Well, get some rest. Tomorrow's a big day. There was something in his voice, concern, perhaps knowledge, that left me unsettled, but I was too exhausted to probe further. The next morning dawned perfect and clear, the kind of pristine Napa Valley day that sells wedding magazines. My hair and makeup team arrived early, transforming me into the bride Judith had envisioned, elegant, refined, a suitable addition to the Hayes legacy, at least on the surface. Standing alone in my room, looking at myself in the full-length mirror, I barely recognized the woman staring back. She was beautiful, yes, but something was missing. The joy, the excitement, the certainty that should accompany a bride on her wedding day. Dad, I whispered to the empty room, I wish you were here. I don't know if I'm doing the right thing. A knock at the door interrupted my moment of doubt. It was time to head to the ceremony. Arthur would be waiting to walk me down the aisle, to give me away to a man I loved but was beginning to realize I didn't fully know. What happened next would change everything. I arrived at the venue in a vintage Rolls-Royce that Brandon had insisted on, another Hayes family tradition. The ceremony site was breathtaking. A hillside overlook with rows of white chairs facing an archway entwined with roses and ivy, the vineyard stretching endlessly behind it. Guests were already seated, a sea of designer dresses and tailored suits. Arthur waited for me at the entrance, distinguished in his dark suit, his silver hair combed neatly. His smile didn't quite reach his eyes. You look beautiful, Vanessa, he said, kissing my cheek. Robert would be proud. Thank you for doing this, I whispered, taking his arm. You're all the family I have now. He patted my hand. About that, there's something we need to discuss before, but he was interrupted by the wedding planner, Judith's choice, of course, who appeared with a tablet in hand and a concerned expression. We have a slight issue, she said, her voice low and controlled. Could you both come with me? She led us to a side entrance where Judith stood with the venue's security manager. Judith wore a champagne-colored gown that probably cost more than my car, her face a mask of controlled composure. There appears to be a misunderstanding, she said, her voice crisp. The security manager, clearly uncomfortable, glanced at his clipboard. Ma'am, according to our final guest list, you're not. That is, Your name isn't... My stomach dropped. What are you saying? Judith stepped forward. The bride's name on the contract is Celeste Harrington. I'm afraid there's been a clerical error. I stared at her, uncomprehending. Celeste? Who is Celeste? The wedding planner looked mortified. I'm sure it's just a mix-up in the paperwork. Let me get Brandon. No need. Brandon's voice came from behind us. He approached slowly, looking conflicted in his tuxedo. I'll handle this. He took me aside, his hands on my shoulders. Nessie, there's been a complication. Mom accidentally submitted the wrong name on some of the paperwork. It's a simple fix. Wrong name? Brandon? Who is Celeste Harrington? His eyes flicked to his mother, then back to me. No one important. An old family connection. Mom probably got confused with another event. But something in his expression, guilt, fear, evasion, triggered alarm. Bells. This wasn't just a clerical error. Brandon, I said firmly. What's going on? Judith interjected, stepping between us. This is hardly the time or place for domestic disputes. We have guests waiting. She turned to the security manager. Let her in for now. We'll sort out the paperwork later. The dismissive way she said her made my blood boil. Arthur, who had been silently observing, finally spoke. Actually, I think this is exactly the right time and place for truth. He pulled an envelope from his inside pocket. Brandon, would you like to explain who Celeste is? Or shall I? The color drained from Brandon's face. Arthur, this isn't... Celeste Harrington is Brandon's wife, Arthur said, his voice clear and steady. They were married 2 years ago in Lake Tahoe. The marriage was never dissolved. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Married? Brandon was already married? That's ridiculous, Judith snapped. Brandon would never... It's true, Arthur continued, unfolding documents from the envelope. I have the marriage certificate here, along with financial records showing joint accounts still active between Brandon and Celeste. I looked at Brandon, waiting for denial, for explanation, for anything that would make this nightmare dissolve. Instead, he closed his eyes briefly, a gesture of defeat. It wasn't a real marriage, he finally said. It was a business arrangement. Celeste's family has vineyards in France. We needed the international connection for distribution rights. The plan was always to annul it after the contracts were secured. And when exactly were you planning to tell me this? My voice was surprisingly steady despite the hurricane inside me. After our honeymoon. Once everything was settled, I didn't want to worry you with business complications. Business complications? I repeated, incredulous. You're legally married to another woman. The wedding planner cleared her throat awkwardly. Perhaps we should postpone the ceremony while you sort this out. There's nothing to sort out, Judith interjected. The Hayes family has a reputation to uphold. The guests are here, the vendors are paid. We'll proceed as planned and handle the legalities discreetly afterward. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You want me to go through with a fake wedding, knowing it's not legal? Brandon took my hands, his eyes pleading. Vanessa, please, we can fix this. We'll file for the annulment first thing Monday. No one needs to know. I pulled my hands away, my mind racing. This couldn't be happening. Yet a part of me wasn't entirely surprised. All those unanswered questions, the evasions about our future, the way Judith had systematically excluded me from every meaningful decision. There's more, Arthur said, quietly, removing another document from his envelope. Vanessa, do you recognize this? It was a loan application with my signature, except I had never signed it. The document showed a $500,000 business loan for Hayes Valley Vineyard expansion, with me listed as the primary borrower. I never signed this, I whispered, shock giving way to horrified understanding. No, you didn't, Arthur confirmed. It's a forgery. One of several financial documents in your name that have been processed in the last 6 months. There's also a line of credit and 2 investment accounts. Brandon stepped forward. That was Mom's idea, a tax strategy. Your credit was better for certain types of loans. I was going to tell you. When? I demanded, my voice rising. After I was legally responsible for debts I knew nothing about? After you tied me to your family with fraud? Guests were starting to notice the commotion. A few were craning their necks, whispering behind their hands. The string quartet had stopped playing, uncertain whether to continue. Judith's facade finally cracked. This is absurd. You should be grateful we included you at all. Do you have any idea what doors the Hayes name would open for someone like you? A nobody from Modesto with a dead father and no connections? Her words hit like physical blows. I stepped back, nearly stumbling in my heels. Arthur put a protective arm around me. That's enough, Judith. I promised Robert I'd look after his daughter, and I intend to keep that promise. How did you find all this? Brandon asked, his voice hollow. I'm a retired estate attorney who made a promise to my best friend, Arthur replied simply. When Vanessa started expressing concerns about the wedding planning, I did some digging. It wasn't difficult to find the paper trail. The officiant approached our group, confusion evident on his face. Is there a problem? The guests are getting restless. It was the moment of decision. I could walk down that aisle, pretend everything was fine, and deal with the mess later as Brandon suggested. Or I could walk away. I looked at Brandon, the man I thought I loved, the future I thought I wanted, and saw him clearly for the first time. Not a Prince Charming who'd swept me off my feet, but a privileged heir who'd been raised to take what he wanted without consequences. There won't be a wedding today, I said, my voice stronger than I felt. Or ever. I turned to the officiant. You might want to announce that the ceremony is canceled. Vanessa, don't do this, Brandon pleaded, reaching for me. We can work this out. I stepped back from his touch. No, Brandon, we can't. Then, in a moment I'll never forget, I turned to face the gathered guests. My voice carried across the hushed crowd. I'm sorry to announce that there will be no wedding today. It seems I was never meant to be the bride. The silence that followed was deafening. The next few hours passed in a blur. Arthur guided me through the chaos, shielding me from Judith's rage and Brandon's desperate attempts to explain. We left the venue in the same Rolls-Royce that had delivered me, the driver discreetly averting his eyes from my tears. Where to? Arthur asked gently as we pulled away from the Hayes estate. I hadn't thought that far ahead. My apartment in San Francisco was sublet in anticipation of moving into Brandon's condo after the honeymoon. Most of my possessions were already in storage. I don't know, I admitted, my voice small. I don't have anywhere to go. Then you'll come home with me, he said decisively. Charlotte will be delighted to have company. Charlotte was Arthur's wife of 40 years, a warm-hearted retired librarian who had always treated me like a niece. Their modest home in Sonoma would be a sanctuary. As we drove, the reality of what had just happened began to sink in. I wasn't just dealing with a canceled wedding. I was facing potential financial ruin from forged loan documents and the public humiliation of being the girl who wasn't really the bride. What happens now? I asked, staring out the window at the vineyards flashing by, so beautiful and now forever tainted. First, we get you somewhere safe, Arthur replied. Then, we fight back. Fight back? Arthur? They're the Hayes family. They practically own the valley. And they committed fraud using your identity, he said firmly. Money and influence don't put you above the law, not on my watch. When we arrived at Arthur and Charlotte's craftsman bungalow, Charlotte took one look at my tear-stained face and wedding dress and opened her arms without a word. I collapsed into her embrace, sobbing like the lost child I felt like. Let it all out, sweetheart, she murmured, stroking my hair. You're safe now. That night, after a hot bath and changed into borrowed pajamas, I sat at their kitchen table while Arthur outlined our next steps. Charlotte placed a mug of tea in front of me, the familiar scent of chamomile momentarily grounding me. We'll file a police report for the identity theft and forgery, Arthur explained. Then contact all 3 credit bureaus to freeze your credit. Tomorrow we'll meet with my former colleague who specializes in fraud cases. I nodded numbly. What about the wedding? All those people saw me leave. They'll be talking. Charlotte squeezed my shoulder. Let them talk. The truth will come out. That's what I'm afraid of, I whispered. Everyone will know I was stupid enough to nearly marry a man who was already married, who was using me for some kind of financial scheme. You weren't stupid, Arthur said firmly. You were deceived by people who made deception their life's work. There's no shame in trusting someone you loved. The next morning, my phone was flooded with messages. From friends, from colleagues, from guests wondering what had happened. Brandon had called 17 times. I couldn't bear to listen to the voicemails. There were also messages from reporters. Apparently, the abrupt cancellation of the Hayesmore wedding was news in wine country social circles. One text from a number I didn't recognize read, "Sources say bride discovered groom already married. Care to comment?" I turned off my phone. The days that followed were a crash course in crisis management. Arthur's colleague, Elena Vasquez, was a fierce litigator who specialized in identity theft cases. In her sleek office overlooking downtown Santa Rosa, she laid out the brutal reality of my situation. The good news is that we have clear evidence of forgery, she explained, reviewing the documents Arthur had gathered. The bad news is that the Hayes family will fight this tooth and nail. They'll claim you were aware of everything, that you authorized Brandon to sign on your behalf. But I didn't, I protested. I believe you, Elena assured me, but litigation is expensive and time-consuming. They're counting on you not having the resources to fight them. Arthur cleared his throat. That's where I come in. Robert left a trust for Vanessa. It's modest, but it should cover legal expenses. I stared at him in shock. Dad left me a trust? But he never mentioned it. He set it up after your mother died, Arthur explained. He added to it bit by bit over the years. He wanted it to be your safety net, though I doubt he ever imagined you'd need it like this. Tears welled in my eyes. Even from beyond the grave, Dad was still protecting me. Elena nodded. Good. Now, about the public narrative. I don't care what people say about me. I interrupted. You should, Elena countered. Public perception can influence legal outcomes. The Hayes family is already spinning this as a case of cold feet, claiming you made accusations to cover your embarrassment. I hadn't considered that. So, what do I do? You control your story, Elena said simply. Not with anger or vindictiveness, but with dignity and truth. Over the next week, we built our case methodically. Elena filed injunctions to prevent any loans in my name from being processed. Arthur reached out to a forensic accountant who specialized in financial fraud. Charlotte helped me find a temporary apartment and a therapist. Meanwhile, the Hayes family went on the offensive. Judith gave an interview to a local lifestyle magazine expressing concern for my mental well-being and suggesting the stress of wedding planning had caused me to invent scenarios. Brandon sent flowers daily with notes begging me to talk to him, claiming everything could be explained. I maintained my silence, focusing instead on rebuilding my life one piece at a time. I reached out to my old boss at the marketing agency, explaining that my planned resignation was now on hold. She welcomed me back with understanding and discretion. Marketing wine country without being involved with the Hayes family might be tricky, she warned. I'll manage, I assured her, though I wasn't entirely confident. 3 weeks after the wedding, that wasn't. Elena called with news. We found Celeste Harrington. She's willing to talk. Celeste agreed to meet at a neutral location, a coffee shop in San Francisco, far from wine country gossip. I arrived early, my stomach in knots, unsure what to expect from the woman who was legally Brandon's wife. She was nothing like I'd imagined. Where I'd pictured a sophisticated French heiress, Celeste was petite and unassuming, dressed in jeans and a simple blouse, her dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. Thank you for meeting me, I said as she slid into the seat across from me. She studied me with intelligent eyes. I suppose we have something in common. Being married to Brandon Hayes? Being used by the Hayes family, she corrected. Though in my case, I went into it with eyes open. Over the next hour, Celeste told me her story. Her family did own vineyards in France, but they were small, struggling operations, not the vast estates Brandon had described. The marriage had indeed been a business arrangement. The Hayes family wanted access to European distribution networks, and Celeste's family needed capital. The agreement was that after 2 years, we'd divorce amicably, she explained. But when the time came, Judith refused to proceed with the dissolution. She said they needed the marriage to remain valid for tax purposes. When I threatened to file for divorce myself, she reminded me that my family's financial stability depended on Hayes' investments. So you're still legally married, I stated, trying to process this information. Celeste nodded. On paper only. I haven't seen Brandon in over a year. I live in New York now, working as a translator. She hesitated. I'm sorry about your wedding. I had no idea Brandon was engaged. Would it have made a difference if you had known? She considered this. I would have tried to warn you. The Hayes family. They don't see people. They see assets and liabilities. As we parted, Celeste handed me a USB drive. Emails, contracts, recordings of conversations with Judith about maintaining our marriage for business purposes. Use them however you need to. I looked at her, confused by her willingness to help. Why are you doing this? She smiled sadly. Because someday, I want to be free to marry someone I actually love, and because what they did to you was cruel. No one deserves that. That night, I reviewed the files with Arthur and Elena. They were damning. Detailed evidence of the Hayes family's manipulation and fraud. Proof that would be, difficult to dispute in court. This changes everything, Elena said, her eyes gleaming with the satisfaction of a lawyer who knows she has a winning case. With this, We can not only clear your name and financial record, but potentially file charges for fraud, forgery, and emotional distress. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I felt hollow. What's the point? It won't undo what happened. It won't erase the humiliation. Arthur placed his hand over mine. No, it won't, but it will give you something more valuable. A clean slate and the resources to build whatever future you choose. Looking at the evidence spread before us, I realized he was right. This wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming my story, my name, my future. Okay, I said, straightening my shoulders. Let's do this. The legal proceedings against the Hayes family began with a deposition in Elena's office. I sat across from Brandon and his attorney, a stern-faced man in an expensive suit who looked at me like I was something stuck to the bottom of his shoe. Judith wasn't present. Her lawyer had successfully argued that her health prevented her from attending. Brandon looked terrible. His normally impeccable appearance had slipped, his hair was disheveled, his eyes bloodshot. When he saw me, he half rose from his chair. Vanessa, Mr. Hayes, Elena interrupted sharply. Please address my client formally during these proceedings. The deposition was brutal. Brandon's attorney painted me as a gold digger who had fabricated allegations when the wedding didn't proceed as planned. But Elena was prepared. Step by step, she presented the evidence. The forged loan documents, expert testimony confirming the signatures weren't mine, bank records showing funds had been moved under my name without my knowledge. Then she played the recordings Celeste had provided, conversations between Brandon and Judith, discussing how to handle both Celeste and me, referring to us as assets to be managed. Brandon's face crumpled as his own voice filled the room. Mom, I can't keep lying to Vanessa about the finances. She's starting to ask questions. Judith's crisp reply, she doesn't need to know everything. Once you're married, her credit and family background give us tax advantages we can't get otherwise. Just keep her focused on wedding details. Brandon. And Celeste, she's threatening to go public. Judith. Increase her monthly payment. Everyone has a price. When the recording ended, the room was silent except for the soft whir of the air conditioning. Brandon stared at the table, unable to meet my eyes. Would you like to revise your earlier statement, Mr. Hayes? Elena asked, her voice deceptively gentle. The one where you claimed Ms. Moore was fully aware of all financial arrangements? Brandon's attorney called for a break. 20 minutes later, they returned with a different approach. A settlement offer. My client is prepared to take full responsibility for the unauthorized use of Ms. Moore's identity, the attorney stated. We're offering immediate dissolution of all financial entanglements, full repayment of any funds accessed, plus a settlement of $200,000 for emotional distress. Elena glanced at me, her expression neutral. We had discussed this possibility, that they might try to buy my silence. And in exchange? I asked, speaking directly to Brandon for the first time. His attorney answered instead. A non-disclosure agreement. This matter would remain private with no criminal charges filed. I looked at Brandon, waiting for him to speak for himself. Finally, he raised his eyes to meet mine. I'm sorry, Vanessa, he said, his voice barely audible. I never meant for it to go this far. Mom has ways of making things seem reasonable when they aren't. You're a grown man, Brandon, I replied, surprised by the steadiness of my voice. You made your choices. Please, he continued, desperation creeping into his tone. My family's reputation, the vineyard, it's all I have. In that moment, I saw him clearly. Not the charming, confident man I'd fallen in love with, but someone who had been molded by privilege and entitlement, who had never faced consequences for his actions. And I felt something unexpected. Pity. I'll consider the offer, I said, standing to leave, but I won't sign anything today. Outside in the hallway. Elena raised an eyebrow. You're actually considering it? No, I admitted, but I wanted time to think about what I really want out of this. That evening, Arthur, Charlotte, and I sat in their living room, weighing options. The settlement would solve my immediate financial problems and allow me to move on quickly. The alternative, a protracted legal battle that might eventually lead to criminal charges, would mean months or years of my life consumed by the past. What do you want, Vanessa? Arthur asked gently. Not what's easiest or what would hurt them most. What would bring you peace? I stared into my tea, watching the steam curl upward. I want my name cleared. I want them to admit what they did, and I hesitated, realizing something important. I want to make sure they can't do this to anyone else. Charlotte nodded. Then you have your answer. The next day, Elena presented our counteroffer. We would settle for full financial restitution plus a larger settlement amount, but only if Brandon and Judith made a public admission of wrongdoing and if all documentation of their scheme was provided to the relevant financial authorities. Absolutely not, Brandon Z. attorney snapped. The Hayes family will not admit to anything in public. Then we'll see them in court, Elena replied calmly, where everything will become public record anyway. It took 3 more weeks of negotiations, but eventually they conceded. The Hayes family's carefully constructed facade was more important to them than money, but not important enough to risk a public trial. On a crispy autumn morning, I stood on the steps of the Napa County Courthouse beside Elena as Brandon and Judith approached, flanked by their legal team. A small group of reporters waited nearby, not the media circus I had feared, but enough to ensure the story would be told. Brandon read from a prepared statement, his voice flat. I, Brandon Hayes, acknowledge that I utilized Vanessa Moore's personal information without her knowledge or consent to secure loans and financial arrangements. I further acknowledge that I misled Ms. Moore regarding my marital status during our relationship. The Hayes family has agreed to make full financial restitution and has cooperated with all relevant authorities regarding these matters. It wasn't the heartfelt apology part of me had hoped for, but it was the truth, publicly stated. As he finished, Judith stepped forward, her face a mask of controlled dignity. The Hayes family regrets these unfortunate events, she said, each word clearly painful to her. We wish Ms. Moore well in her future endeavors. With that, they turned and walked away, Judith's spine rigid with anger and humiliation. A reporter approached me. Ms. Moore, how do you feel about the settlement? I considered the question. How did I feel? Relieved, vindicated, but also strangely empty. The truth was out, but it hadn't magically healed the wounds of betrayal. I'm grateful for closure, I said finally. Now I can move forward. The story made regional news for a week or so. Wine country wedding scandal settled, read the headlines. There were sympathetic profiles of me as the wronged bride, speculation about the Hayes family's financial practices, and gossip about what would happen to the vineyard now that their reputation was tarnished. I didn't follow the coverage. Instead, I focused on rebuilding. The settlement provided enough money to pay off my student loans, buy a small condo in Oakland, and even set aside funds to eventually start my own marketing consultancy. For the first time in my adult life, I had financial security, the kind my father had worked so hard to provide. But money couldn't fill the emptiness inside me. I threw myself into work, taking on extra projects, staying late at the office, anything to avoid the quiet of my new home where thoughts of what might have been haunted me. You need to grieve, my therapist told me during our weekly session. Not just the relationship, but the future you thought you would have. I'm fine, I insisted. I'm moving on. But late at night, when sleep eluded me, I would find myself scrolling through old photos, wondering how I could have been so blind, so eager to believe in a love that was built on lies. 6 months after the settlement, I received an unexpected visitor at my office. My assistant buzzed through. There's a Celeste Harrington here to see you. Celeste looked different, more confident, her hair cut in a stylish bob, dressed in a chic suit that spoke of new prosperity. I'm in town for a conference, she explained as we sat in a nearby cafe. I wanted to thank you in person. Thank me? For what? After everything came out, my divorce from Brandon was finally processed, she said, a smile lighting her face. The Hayes family settled with my family too, enough to save our vineyards. And she held up her left hand, where a simple engagement ring sparkled. I'm getting married, for real this time. I felt a genuine smile spread across my face, the first in months that didn't feel forced. I'm happy for you, Celeste. Truly. What about you? She asked. Are you okay? The question caught me off guard. Everyone in my life had stopped asking if I was okay, accepting my assurances that I was fine, that I was moving on. But something about Celeste's direct gaze made pretense impossible. I'm getting there, I admitted. Some days are harder than others. She nodded, understanding. It takes time to trust again. Not just others, but yourself. How did you do it? I asked. How did you move past it all? Celeste considered this. I stopped seeing myself as a victim of the Hayes family and started seeing myself as someone who survived them. There's power in that perspective. Her words stayed with me long after we parted. That night, standing in my new living room, I looked at the boxes still unpacked from my move, at the walls I hadn't bothered to decorate, at the life I'd been putting on hold while I nursed my wounds. Surviving wasn't enough. It was time to start living again. "You're sure about this?" Arthur asked, concern evident in his voice as he helped me load the last box into my car. "Oakland to Sonoma is quite a commute." "I'm sure," I replied, surveying the small bungalow I had just rented on the outskirts of Sonoma. It was modest. 2 bedrooms, a slightly outdated kitchen, a backyard that needed attention. But it was only 15 minutes from Arthur and Charlotte. And more importantly, it was in wine country. Some might have thought it strange that I would choose to return to the region dominated by the Hayes family. My therapist had questioned whether I was subconsciously seeking continued confrontation with my past. But my decision wasn't about them. It was about reclaiming something I had discovered I loved. During my time with Brandon, beneath the social anxiety and Judith's manipulations, I had developed a genuine passion for wine country culture. The vintners who spoke of their craft with reverence, the seasonal rhythms of the vineyards, the way the entire community celebrated each harvest. I refused to let the Hayes family take that from me, too. Besides, I had a plan. 2 weeks after my conversation with Celeste, I had registered a business name, True North Marketing Consultancy, specializing in brand development for small to mid-sized wineries and local agricultural businesses. My years at the agency had given me connections and expertise. My personal experience had given me insight and empathy. "I know what it's like to feel overshadowed by established names," I explained to my first potential client, Maria Cortez, whose family had recently purchased a struggling 5-acre vineyard. "The Hayes family and others like them have dominated the narrative for generations, but there's room for new voices, authentic stories." Maria, a former tech executive who had cashed out to pursue her family's dream, nodded thoughtfully. "That's exactly what we want. Not to be the next Hayes Valley, but to be recognized for our own approach." She became my first client. Within 3 months, I had 5 more, all small operations looking to distinguish themselves in a crowded market. My approach was different from the traditional wine country marketing playbook. Instead of emphasizing exclusivity and legacy, I helped my clients highlight sustainability, innovation, and accessibility. "Wine shouldn't be intimidating," I told a local business reporter who interviewed me for a feature on new entrepreneurs in the region. "The most interesting stories in this valley aren't the old money estates. They're the first-generation winemakers, the family operations, the people bringing fresh perspectives." The article brought more attention than I expected. My phone rang constantly with potential clients. I hired an assistant, then a graphic designer. By the 1-year anniversary of my non-wedding, True North had become a respected boutique agency with a waiting list. I was busy, sometimes overwhelmingly so, but the work fulfilled me in ways I hadn't anticipated. Each successful campaign, each client whose business grew under my guidance, felt like a personal victory. I was building something that was entirely mine, defined by my values, not someone else's expectations. And yet, something was missing. "When was the last time you went on a date?" Charlotte asked one Sunday afternoon as we walked through her garden, gathering herbs for dinner. I laughed, but it sounded hollow even to my own ears. "Between the business and the house renovation, I barely have time to sleep, let alone date." "That's not an answer," she persisted gently. "It's been almost 2 years, Vanessa." Had it really been that long? The days had blurred together in a haze of work and careful rebuilding. I had made new friends, mostly through my clients and the local business community, but I deliberately avoided anything resembling romance. "I'm not ready," I admitted. "The idea of trusting someone again, I can't imagine it." Charlotte squeezed my hand. "Not all men are Brandon Hayes. I know that intellectually, but your heart hasn't caught up to your head," she finished for me. "That's natural. Just don't close the door entirely." I promised to try, but it was easier said than done. When a client's brother asked me to dinner, I claimed a deadline. When a friendly vintner from Alexander Valley suggested a wine tasting just the 2 of us, I brought my assistant along. The walls I had built were high and thick. Then came the Sonoma Valley Harvest Festival, the biggest event of the year for the local wine industry. True North had 3 clients showcasing their wines, and I was determined to make the evening a success for them. The festival was held at the county fairgrounds, transformed for the occasion with twinkling lights, live music, and booths from every winery in the region. I was checking on my clients' displays when I literally collided with a man carrying a crate of wine bottles. "I'm so sorry," I exclaimed as several bottles toppled. Thankfully, none broke. "Entirely my fault," he said, kneeling to gather the fallen bottles. I was trying to navigate by memory rather than sight. He looked up, and our eyes met. He was perhaps in his early 40s, with laugh lines around intelligent brown eyes and salt and pepper hair cropped short. He wore a simple button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing forearms tanned from outdoor work. "Can I help you carry these somewhere?" I offered. "That would be great, actually. I'm headed to booth 27. I recognized the number. "Hillside Organic? You're with them?" "In a manner of speaking," he replied with a smile. "I'm Daniel Reyes. The vineyard is mine, though mine is generous considering how much the bank still owns." Hillside Organic was a small operation I'd heard of but never visited. They were known for sustainable practices and unpretentious wines that had begun winning regional awards. "I'm Vanessa Moore, True North Marketing." Recognition flashed in his eyes. "The woman who's been helping the little guys compete with the Hayes and Sterlings of the Valley? Your reputation precedes you." I felt a flush of pride and something else I couldn't quite identify. Just trying to level the playing field a bit. We reached his booth, which was notably less flashy than many others, but thoughtfully designed with natural materials and simple, elegant signage. "Would you like to try some wine?" he asked. "It's the least I can offer my rescuer." I should have politely declined and continued my rounds. Instead, I heard myself say, "I'd like that." Daniel poured a Cabernet Franc, watching as I swirled, sniffed, and tasted. "This is exceptional," I said, genuinely impressed. "The balance is perfect." "Thank you." His smile was warm but not arrogant. "It's our newest vintage. We're still finding our voice." "How long have you been making wine?" 7 years. Before that, I was a geologist for a mining company. Soul-crushing work with good pay. "What made you change?" He considered the question seriously. "I wanted to create something that connected me to the land, to seasons, to growth, something my daughter could be proud of someday." "You have a daughter?" "Sophia. She's 11 going on 30. He pulled out his phone to show me a photo of a girl with his eyes and a bright, confident smile. "She thinks the vineyard is her personal playground." There was such obvious love in his voice that I felt a pang of, what? Envy? Longing? I pushed it aside. "And her mother?" The question slipped out before I could stop it. "I'm sorry, that's none of my business." "No, it's fine," he assured me. "Clara died 5 years ago. Cancer. It's just been Sophia and me since then. I'm sorry for your loss." "Thank you." He poured another wine, a Sauvignon Blanc this time. "What about you? Has True North always been your dream?" I hesitated, unsure how much to share. The story of my almost wedding to Brandon Hayes wasn't exactly secret, but I didn't advertise it either. "It evolved," I said carefully. "I worked for a larger agency before. Then circumstances changed, and I realized I wanted to build something that reflected my own values." Daniel studied me with those perceptive eyes. "Sometimes the best paths aren't the ones we originally planned." "Very true," I agreed, surprised by how comfortable I felt in his presence. We talked for another 20 minutes, about wine, about marketing challenges for small producers, about the changing culture of the valley. He was knowledgeable without being pretentious, passionate without being overwhelming. When I finally glanced at my watch, I was shocked to see how much time had passed. "I should check on my clients," I said reluctantly. "Of course." He hesitated, then added, "Would it be completely inappropriate if I asked for your card? Professionally speaking, I mean. Hillside could use some marketing help." I handed him my card, oddly pleased by the request. "Call anytime." As I walked away, I realized I was smiling, a genuine, unguarded smile that had nothing to do with professional success. Later that evening, as I was saying goodbye to my last client, I spotted Daniel across the fairgrounds packing up his booth. He waved and I waved back, feeling a flutter of something I hadn't experienced in years. Maybe Charlotte was right. Maybe it was time to stop rebuilding the walls and start opening a few doors instead. Daniel called 3 days after the festival. "Is this strictly a business call, or could I persuade you to discuss Hillside's marketing needs over dinner?" he asked, his voice warm but hesitant through the phone. I surprised myself with how quickly I answered. "Dinner sounds nice." We met at a small farm-to-table restaurant in Sonoma, the kind of place locals frequent, unpretentious, but excellent. No white tablecloths, no sommelier, just honest food and a carefully curated wine list featuring local producers. "I hope this is okay," Daniel said as we were seated in a corner booth. "I wanted somewhere we could actually talk." "It's perfect," I assured him, realizing I meant it. After Brandon's world of exclusive restaurants and private clubs, there was something refreshing about a place that valued substance over show. Daniel was easy to talk to. He asked thoughtful questions and actually listened to my answers. We discussed his vineyard's challenges, limited production, competition from established names, distribution hurdles, but the conversation naturally drifted to more personal topics. So how does a geologist become a winemaker? I asked as we shared a dessert, a simple berry crumble with locally made vanilla ice cream. Midlife crisis, he admitted with a self-deprecating smile. I was traveling constantly for the mining company, missing Sophia's childhood. After Clara's diagnosis, priorities shifted dramatically. We had saved enough for me to make a change, and Clara encouraged it. Life's too short to postpone joy, she said. His expression grew distant for a moment. She never got to see the first harvest, but she chose the name, Hillside Organic. She said it sounded honest, like something you could trust. I felt a lump in my throat. She sounds like she was remarkable. She was. He smiled again, but with a touch of sadness. What about you? How did True North begin? This was the moment. The fork in the road. I could give him the sanitized version of my story that I usually shared with new acquaintances, or I could be honest about the painful journey that had led me here. Something about Daniel's openness made me choose the latter. It started with a wedding that never happened, I began, and then told him everything. Meeting Brandon, the whirlwind romance, Judith's manipulation, the humiliation at the altar, and the fraud that had been planned all along. Daniel listened without interruption, his expression shifting from surprise to concern to quiet anger on my behalf. When I finished, he reached across the table and gently covered my hand with his. I can't imagine anyone treating another person that way, he said, genuine outrage in his voice. I'm so sorry you went through that. It's okay, I said, automatically. No, it's not, he replied firmly. But it does explain why you're so passionate about helping smaller vineyards compete with the established families. You're fighting Goliaths. I hadn't thought of it that way, but he was right. Every time one of my client wineries succeeded, it felt like a small victory against the system the Hayes family represented. I suppose I am, I admitted, though I try not to frame it as revenge. It's not revenge, Daniel said thoughtfully. It's rebalancing, creating space for authenticity in an industry that often values pedigree over quality. His understanding touched me deeply. For the first time since the almost wedding, I felt truly seen by someone who hadn't known me before. As Daniel walked me to my car, I felt a familiar tension, the moment in a date when intentions become clear. He paused beside my driver's door, his expression thoughtful. I've really enjoyed tonight, Vanessa. Me too, I replied, meaning it. I'd like to see you again, but I want to be clear about something. He took a breath. I'm a package deal. Me and Sophia. My life revolves around her and the vineyard. It's not glamorous or simple. The honesty of this statement struck me. Brandon had never been this transparent about what a future with him would entail. I appreciate your directness, I said, and I'd like to see you again too. His smile in response was worth every moment of vulnerability. Our relationship developed slowly, deliberately. Daniel never pushed, seeming to intuitively understand my need for caution. We had dinner once a week. He showed me around Hillside Organic, explaining his sustainable practices with infectious enthusiasm. I helped him refine his marketing approach pro bono, finding joy in supporting a business built on genuine passion rather than pretension. A month after our first date, he invited me to dinner at his home, a modest farmhouse on the vineyard property, to meet Sophia. I was more nervous about meeting an 11-year-old than I had been facing Brandon's high society friends. What if she didn't like me? What if she resented her father dating someone who wasn't her mother? Sophia answered the door when I arrived, evaluating me with intelligent eyes so like her father's. You're the marketing lady, she stated. Dad says you're helping us tell our story better. I'm trying to, I replied, opting for a honesty. Your dad's created something special here. She nodded seriously. He works really hard, sometimes too hard. Do you like board games? The abrupt change of topic made me smile. I do. What's your favorite? Scrabble. I'm the champion in this house. That sounds like a challenge. Her solemn expression broke into a grin. You're on. Dinner was homemade pizza, with Sophia proudly showing off her dough-rolling skills. Afterward, she did indeed trounce both Daniel and me at Scrabble, crowing with delight when she played quixotic on a triple-word score. Bedtime, champion, Daniel announced when the game concluded. School tomorrow. To my surprise, Sophia gave me a quick hug before heading upstairs. You should come back, she whispered. Dad smiles more when you're here. Later, as Daniel and I sat on the porch with glasses of his Cabernet Franc, watching the stars emerge above the vineyard, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't experienced in years. "Sophia's amazing," I said. "You've done a wonderful job with her." "She makes it easy," he replied. "Kids are surprisingly resilient if you're honest with them." He turned to face me. "She likes you, by the way." The hug was the Sophia seal of approval. I smiled, touched. "I like her too. Vanessa," he said after a moment, his voice gentle but serious. "I need to say something." My heart quickened, old fears rising. "I know you've been hurt, badly. I know trust doesn't come easily anymore. I just want you to know that I'm not in a hurry. Whatever this is between us," he gestured between us, "it can develop at whatever pace feels right to you." The simple kindness of this statement brought unexpected tears to my eyes. "Thank you," I whispered. He reached for my hand, holding it gently as we sat in comfortable silence, the vineyard stretching out before us, full of promise and growth. Over the next 6 months, my relationship with Daniel and Sophia deepened gradually. I joined them for weekend hikes, helped with harvest preparations, cheered at Sophia's soccer games. True North continued to thrive, expanding to a team of 6 with a waiting list of clients. One evening, as I was leaving my office, I ran into a familiar face downtown, Brandon's cousin Michael, who had always been kind to me during family gatherings. "Vanessa," he said, looking genuinely pleased to see me. "You look wonderful." "Thanks, Michael. How are you?" "Good, all things considered." He hesitated. "Have you heard about Hayes Valley?" I shook my head. I deliberately avoided news about the Hayes family. "They're selling, the vineyard, the estate, everything." The news stunned me. Hayes Valley had been in their family for generations. It was Judith's entire identity. "What happened?" I asked, surprised by my own curiosity. "After the incident at your wedding, things unraveled quickly. The fraud investigation led to audits, which uncovered years of financial manipulation. Most of their investors pulled out. Brandon tried to save it, but he shrugged. The family name doesn't carry the weight it once did." I didn't know how to feel. Part of me, a small hurt part, felt vindicated. But mostly I felt nothing. The Hayes family no longer occupied space in my emotional landscape. "I'm sorry," I said, meaning it. "That must be difficult for everyone." "It's for the best, honestly. Brandon's in rehab. He started drinking heavily after everything fell apart. Judith had a minor stroke last year. The vineyard was too much stress." He studied my face. "You really have moved on, haven't you?" "I have," I confirmed. Life took an unexpected turn, but I'm grateful for where I am now. Later that night, I told Daniel about the encounter as we prepared dinner in my kitchen. He listened thoughtfully, chopping vegetables while I recounted Michael's news. "How do you feel about it?" he asked when I finished. I considered the question carefully. I thought I'd feel something more. Satisfaction, maybe, or closure. But it's just information. Their story isn't my story anymore. Daniel smiled, setting down his knife to pull me into an embrace. That, Vanessa Moore, is what true healing looks like. As I leaned into his solid warmth, I realized he was right. The woman who had stood humiliated in a wedding dress, whose identity had been stolen and trust betrayed, was still part of me. But she was no longer all of me. I had built something new, something authentic. True North wasn't just my company's name, it had become my personal compass. That night, for the first time, Daniel stayed. As we lay together in the quiet darkness, his arm around me, I felt the last walls around my heart finally crumble. "I think I'm falling in love with you," I whispered, the words both terrifying and liberating. He kissed my forehead softly. "I'm already there." 1 year later, I stood in the tasting room of Hillside Organic, surveying the transformation. The once modest space now featured warm reclaimed wood, strategic lighting that highlighted the rich colors of the wines, and storytelling displays that shared the vineyard's sustainable practices and family heritage. True North's design team had outdone themselves. Daniel approached, slipping his arm around my waist. "What do you think? Ready for the grand reopening tomorrow?" "More than ready," I assured him. "The new branding is perfect, authentic but elevated. You're going to need to increase production." "Already in the works. The new acreage we leased is being prepared for planting next spring." The past year had brought remarkable growth for both Hillside Organic and True North. My agency had become the go-to marketing partner for small to mid-sized wineries throughout Sonoma and Napa counties. Daniel's wines had won several significant awards, bringing attention and distribution opportunities. But the most meaningful growth had been personal. My relationship with Daniel had deepened into a partnership built on mutual respect and understanding. Sophia and I had developed our own bond. I helped with homework, taught her photography, and listened to her increasingly insightful observations about life and relationships. "Dad says you're not like other grown-ups," she had told me during one of our Saturday morning baking sessions. "He says you understand what matters." "What does matter?" I'd asked, curious about her. Perspective. She'd considered this seriously while measuring flour. Being real, keeping promises, making things better instead of just prettier. Her words had stayed with me, a reminder of what I had learned through loss and rebuilding. Now, as Daniel and I walked through the vineyard after finishing the tasting room preparations, the late afternoon sun bathed the rows of vines in golden light. We stopped at the highest point of the property, overlooking the valley below. "Remember when we first met at the Harvest Festival?" Daniel asked, taking my hand. "You helped me pick up those bottles I dropped. You said you were trying to navigate by memory rather than sight," I recalled, smiling at the memory. "Best collision of my life." He turned to face me, suddenly serious. "Vanessa, before I met you, Hillside was my second chance, my attempt to build something meaningful after losing Clara. But something was still missing." My heart quickened as he reached into his pocket. "You taught me that second chances aren't just about moving forward, they're about being brave enough to trust again." He opened his palm to reveal a simple but elegant ring, a single emerald set in a band of brushed gold. "This isn't a Hayes family heirloom. It's new, like what we've built together, but I hope it will become something we pass down someday." Tears filled my eyes as he continued. "I love you, Vanessa. Sophia loves you. We want to be your family, not in some distant future, but now. Will you marry me?" The word marry once carried such complicated associations for me. Memories of humiliation, betrayal, loss. But standing there with Daniel, I felt only joy and certainty. "Yes," I whispered, then louder. "Yes." As he slipped the ring onto my finger, a voice called from down the hill. Did she say yes? Sophia was running toward us, her face alight with excitement. Daniel laughed. "She did." Sophia launched herself into our arms, creating a three-person embrace. "Finally! I've been helping him plan this for weeks." "You knew?" I asked, wiping happy tears. "Duh. Who do you think helped pick the ring? Dad was going to get something super traditional, but I told him you'd want something different, like you." I hugged her tightly. "You were absolutely right." That evening, we celebrated with a simple dinner in the farmhouse, now our home as I had moved in 3 months earlier. Arthur and Charlotte joined us, bringing champagne and their heartfelt blessings. "Your father would be so proud," Arthur told me quietly as we stood watching Daniel and Sophia set the table. "Not because of your success, though that's remarkable, but because you found happiness on your own terms." The wedding we planned was nothing like my first almost wedding. We held it at Hillside, organic on a perfect spring day with just 60 guests. Real friends, chosen family, clients who had become more than business associates. I wore a simple dress in pale green that matched my engagement ring. Sophia was my maid of honor, beaming with importance in her first formal dress. Arthur walked me down the aisle, a path through the vineyard lined with wildflowers. When we reached Daniel, who waited with the officiant under an arch of grapevines, Arthur placed my hand in his and said clearly, "With joy and without reservation, I give this woman to be married." The ceremony was brief but meaningful. We wrote our own vows, promises of honesty, partnership, and growth. When Daniel slipped the wedding band onto my finger, selected with Sophia's input, of course, he whispered, "True, North," making me smile through my tears. At the reception, held in the renovated barn beside the tasting room, I danced with Arthur, then with Daniel, and finally with Sophia, who had insisted on a special family dance for the 3 of us. As the evening wound down, I stepped outside for a moment of quiet reflection. The vineyard stretched before me, illuminated by strings of lights in the eye. Rising moon. From this vantage point, I could see the life we were building. Not perfect, not without challenges, but authentic and deeply rooted. I thought of the woman I had been 3 years earlier, standing in a wedding dress while whispers spread through a crowd of strangers. The humiliation that had once seemed unbearable had led me here, to a love built on truth, to work that fulfilled me, to wide. A family formed by choice rather than obligation. Daniel joined me, wrapping his arms around me from behind. "Mrs. Reyes Moore," he murmured against my ear. We had decided to hyphenate, honoring both our histories while creating something new. Any regrets? I turned in his embrace to face him. Not a single one. Even about... He didn't need to finish. We both knew he meant the Hayes family. The scandal, the pain. Especially not about that, I said with certainty. Without that experience, I might never have found my true path. Or you. Inside, Sophia was gathering guests for the cake cutting. Her voice carried through the open doors. Come on, everyone. It's time for the official family photo. Daniel took my hand, and together we walked back into the celebration, not just of our marriage, but of the journey that had brought us here. Later that night, after the guests had departed and Sophia had finally been persuaded to go to bed, though she insisted on sleeping in the new guest room of the farmhouse, just for the wedding night, Daniel and I sat on the porch swing, still in our wedding clothes, sharing a glass of Hillside's best vintage. You know, Daniel said, thoughtfully. When Clara was sick, she made me promise something. She said, "Promise you won't close your heart. Sophia needs to see what love looks like, even after loss." I leaned my head against his shoulder. She was very wise. She would have liked you, he said softly. Strong, principled, kind. The compliment warmed me. I wish I could have known her. In a way, you carry part of her. Legacy. In how you love Sophia. In how you've helped me preserve what we started with Hillside. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds of the vineyard, a chorus of crickets, the distant call of an owl, the gentle rustling of leaves in the light breeze. What are you thinking? Daniel asked eventually. I considered the question, looking out at the rows of vines, silvered by moonlight. I'm thinking about names, I said. How they shape us, define us. Vanessa Moore became Vanessa Hayes to be, then back to Vanessa Moore, and now Vanessa Reyes Moore. But through all those changes, I was finding my way to who I really am. And who is that? He asked, genuine curiosity in his voice. I smiled, the answer clearer to me now than it had ever been. Someone who knows that real love doesn't demand you become someone else. It helps you become more authentically yourself. Daniel kissed me softly. That's what I aim to do every day. Love you exactly as you are while supporting who you're becoming. As we sat together under the stars, I felt a profound sense of rightness. The road had been winding with unexpected detours and painful setbacks, but it had led me here, to this man, this family, this life I had built with intention and care. 3 years ago, I had stood in a wedding dress while people whispered that my name wasn't on the list, that I didn't belong. Tonight, I wore a different dress and a different ring, surrounded by people who knew my true name and valued what it represented. The whispers had faded, the documents that once exposed lies, now gathered dust in a lawyer's archive. The Hayes family continued their own journey, separate from mine, and I had found something far more precious than the acceptance I had once craved from them. I had found my authentic self, my true purpose, and a love built on honesty rather than illusion. As Daniel and I finally rose to go inside, to our first night as husband and wife, I paused for one last look at the vineyard, at the tangible manifestation of second chances and new beginnings. Ready? Daniel asked, holding out his hand. I took it without hesitation. Ready. Some weddings end before they begin. Some vows are broken before they're spoken. But the most sacred commitment you'll ever make isn't to someone else. It's to yourself, to honor your worth, to trust your instincts, to believe in second chances. They tried to erase my name from the guest list, but in finding my true north, I wrote my own story, one of resilience, redemption, and love that asks for nothing but truth in return.